ship the art back to Paris, which I always think is adding insult to injury. In fact, one member of Napoleon's art theft unit, someone called Citizen Bicard, stole so many drawings in the course of the Napoleonic Wars that when he died, having sold most of what he stole, he still was able to bequeath 11,000 drawings to his native city of Lille. So this gives you some sense of the extent of the art looting during the Napoleonic era, and we actually don't know the exact amounts. But here we have what I mentioned, the Treaty of Modena. Here we have the Treaty of Tolentine, which is the treaty that was essentially a ceasefire between Napoleon and the Papal States. And Napoleon, this is how the term is phrased about what Napoleon gets to claim from the papal collection. Of course, he took much more. And this is cut off in my high-tech slide. This is Napoleon gloating about everything that he stole from all these cities in Italy, and he has a whole lot forward to Paris without delay. The only cities that got away with retaining their art were the ones that surrendered in advance, Turin and Naples, and they surrendered in part in order to protect their cultural heritage, which is why they were not looted as well. So the Louvre became a stolen art warehouse, and Denon was the mastermind collector. The central panels of the Ghent altarpiece were only returned in 1815 as a gift of King Louis XVIII in thanks for Ghent having sheltered him when Napoleon escaped from Elba. They protected him, and in thanks, this is Denon by the way here, in thanks he returned the central panels to them. And they were back for less than a year before our friend the renegade vicar, who I mentioned to you, decided to steal it. He stole, in fact, only the wing panels, which had not been taken by Napoleon, and we're not sure why he took only the wing panels. He may have had difficulty orchestrating, as you imagine, they're very heavy. The whole thing weighs 3 tons, the wing panels probably weigh about 2 tons on their own. And he must have had accomplices who were sent by this unscrupulous Brussels dealer, Neuenhaus. Neuenhaus is an interesting character because he benefited on a number of occasions by selling originals and forgeries of the Ghent altarpiece. You have to imagine this is a time when it's uncertain who owns what art, and the concept of national patrimony that we have today didn't exist in the same way. On the one hand, no one knew that Napoleon wasn't going to rule the world forever. So the idea that a territory taken over by him would revert to its original ownership was not a certainty. Also, the nations of Belgium, Italy, Greece, among others, didn't exist yet. They're creations of the 19th century. So the concept of a nation owning its cultural heritage didn't exist in the same way. The question I always ask my students to discuss this is who, legality aside, in the moral question, who should own a work of art by Titian, a portrait of an Austrian Habsburg who lived his entire life in Madrid, and the painting is in a collection at the National Gallery in DC. Is it Venetian? Is it Italian? Because, you know, Venetians wouldn't like to be called Italian. Is it Spanish? Is it Austrian? Well, legally, it's the property of whoever bought it legitimately last, but in a moral question, it's a difficult one to answer. I think the easiest answer is it's international cultural heritage, but that doesn't always go over so well when nations have egos and stuff. So this fellow Neuenhaus actually had sold what he claimed were the stolen panels of the Ghent altarpiece before he acquired the real stolen panels. He bought from one of Napoleon's generals, a General Belliard, who was active in Spain. He bought a copy of the Ghent altarpiece, painted in the 16th century. This is the central panel of the copy, painted by Michel Coxy in 1559. This was not meant as a forgery when Coxy painted it. It was meant as an homage purchased by someone who couldn't buy the original. But it was sold as the stolen original, one panel at a time, by Neuenhaus. Then he acquired the real stolen original and sold that as well, the fellow Edward Sally I mentioned. So the Ghent altarpiece was divided between a number of different cities at this time. It can be a little bit tricky to keep track of them, but I just want to mention a couple of other events in criminal history. Here, just to illustrate, you have the later Victorian copy that you may have seen in our history books with the bearskin covering the objectionable portion. It's actually a very good copy. Here you have photograph of St. Bavo Cathedral, also called St. Bavon, that's the French name. And here you have our next hero, Canon Gabriel van den Veen. Canon Gabriel van den Veen was an amateur archaeologist. He was the historian and archivist for the Cathedral of St. Bavon, and he was the canon in his religious duties. And he, along with the bishop and the mayor of Ghent, were determined to protect the Ghent altarpiece from the Germans who were en route at the beginning of the First World War. And it was considered self-evident that the Germans would try to steal the Ghent altarpiece. They had already stolen art and destroyed the library of Louvain in Belgium, and Ghent was on the horizon, so they needed to do something very quickly in order to protect the masterpiece of the city. But the mayor and the bishop were very concerned that there would be reprisals if they prevented the German army from getting the prize that they sought. So they came up with a plan. Canon Gabriel van den Veen, essentially on his own, had to hide the Ghent altarpiece and not tell anyone where it was, because the bishop and the mayor were sure to be the first people to be interrogated. So with the help of some locals, friends of his, citizens of Ghent, during the night just before the German invasion, in order to protect the location of the Ghent altarpiece should any locals become German informants, Canon van den Veen arranged for a junk cart to be driven into the courtyard of the Episcopal Palace, which is adjacent to the cathedral. It's just over here. And by night, he and his colleagues dismantled the Ghent altarpiece and brought it panel by panel to the Episcopal Palace next door. And the junk cart, you have to imagine, this is like a flea market on wheels. They unloaded everything in the middle of the night, put each of the panels wrapped in carpets at the bottom of the junk cart, and then piled all the junk back on top of it. And then, pretending that the junk man had sold them some goods that evening, the junk cart proceeded on and made stops at other houses in Ghent in the middle of the night, and he stopped long enough for the canon to hide each of the panels in a different house between the floorboards and between the walls of these Ghent residences. He was interrogated. He managed to convince the Germans on a number of different occasions. There were these 4 different people who came looking for the Ghent altarpiece, detectives sent by the German army to look for it, and on each occasion he managed to convince them that he didn't know the location. But Germans began conscripting houses, to seizing local houses to be used as barracks, and there was a danger that these local houses would be occupied by German troops, some of them that contained panels of the Ghent altarpiece. So he had to move them on a number of occasions, and unfortunately we don't know how he did that. He may have used the junk cart ploy or something else equally wild. But near the end of the war, the Germans threatened to blow up the entire city of Ghent if they weren't given the Ghent altarpiece. But the armistice was signed before they were able to do so, thankfully. And the Ghent altarpiece was preserved essentially thanks to this man. The Ghent altarpiece is one of the very few works of art, there's only about 4 that are mentioned in the Treaty of Versailles, which is the treaty that that marked the end of the First World War. And it was returned as war reparations. However, this enraged Germany because, if you can remember our slightly confusing chain of who stole what and sold it to who when, the Germans did not actually steal the wing panels of the altarpiece. It was stolen by the Renegade Vicar, sold to the Brussels dealer, sold to Edward Saly, sold to the King of Prussia, and eventually was bequeathed to Germany. So they could claim more innocence than a lot of American museums today. However, the works were forcibly returned, and the passive-aggressive curators left a sign on the wall of the museum where the painting used to be, taken from Germany by the Treaty of Versailles. So, when the Second World War rolled around, the fact of this forced reparation was one of the reasons why the Ghent altarpiece was #1 on Hitler's list of works of art that he was going to seize for himself. Now,